Welcome. Today, we are going to learn how to find an angle measure given the side lengths or the sine, cosine, or tangent of that angle. Basically, what I mean by that is remember, the sine function is a ratio of two sides. Cosine is also a ratio of two sides, and the tangent's a ratio of two sides. So if I was to look at this triangle and I was to ask you, what is the cosine of angle F? The cosine of angle F is this adjacent side divided by the hypotenuse, so it'd be 5 over 6. So the cosine of F is 5 over 6. Well, it doesn't give us the actual angle measure. We want to know, what is that angle measure if the ratio of the cosine is 5 over 6? Well, our calculators can do what's called the inverse. That's these ones over here that have the little -1 next to it or above it, kind of like an exponent. It's not an exponent though. It just means I'm doing the inverse sine, inverse cosine, inverse tangent in order to find the angle. So taking the sine of an angle gives us a number, a ratio. Taking the inverse sine of that number or ratio will give us back out the angle measure. So let's look at this problem we're showing here. Now again, the first thing I'm going to emphasize is we're using calculators, so make sure your calculators are in degree mode. Again, make sure you go to the mode settings on your calculator if you need to, and make sure they're set in degree mode. On this one here, my desktop calculator, again here, if I click on this see now I'm in what's called radians, which we don't want, I want degrees. So now I'm in degree mode. So that's the first thing I always do, is make sure I'm in degree mode. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to remember that for this particular problem here that I'm showing, the sine, actually it wants us to find the measure of angle G, not F. So the measure of angle G, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually draw that triangle so I can kind of think about what sides I'm using. I'm looking for this angle measure here, G. And what are the two sides it gives me? It gives me the opposite of G, 5, and it gives me the hypotenuse, 6. So I'm actually having the ratio of the opposite over the hypotenuse, which I'm going to put back up here so we remember opposite over hypotenuse is the sine, adjacent over hypotenuse is the cosine, and opposite over adjacent is the tangent. So since I have the opposite and the hypotenuse, I'm looking at the sine function. But now the sine of G, whatever that angle measure is this ratio of opposite over hypotenuse. So it's that ratio of 5 over 6. What I want to do though is I want to find A. I already know the ratio. I can see it here. It's asking for this angle measure. So A is going to equal the inverse sine of 5 over 6. So I grab my calculator, and if you'll notice on calculators, we have our three trig functions, the sine function, the cosine function, and the tangent. But look just above the sine function, you'll see a little blue sign with a little -1, kind of like an exponent. Just above the cosine is a little cosine with a -1. Just above the tangent is a little tangent with a -1. So I want to do the inverse sine of 5 over 6. So that blue is indicating I need to hit the second key. So I hit the second key, and then I hit the sine. And if you'll look up here on my calculator now, it says sine with a little -1. That doesn't mean it's an exponent of -1. It means it's a inverse sine. Now I'm going to type in that ratio of 5 over 6. 5 over 6, or 5 divided by 6. And I'm going to hit enter. And it tells me that angle measure is 56 degrees. Now, it does say round to the nearest tenth, so I'm going to do 56.4 degrees. Now, on my desktop calculator, I do that a little bit differently. First of all, Again, here's my sine, my cosine, and my tangent functions. And kind of like the calculator, where I push this second key, on the desktop calculator, there's a second key. If you push it, you'll notice that sine, cosine, and tangent now have a little -1 above it. That means I'm doing the inverse. Here I'm taking the sine, push the second, now I'm doing the inverse. So, but you'll push it after you do the ratio. So on this desktop calculator, I actually do the 5 divided by 6 and hit equals. That's my 5/6, like I have inside the parentheses here. Now I'm going to do the inverse sine. So I hit that very last, and I get my 56.44, just like I did on my calculator. So, and since I'm rounding to 1 decimal place, I come and I type in here 55.4, and that was the angle measure. Again, make sure, whoa, 56.4. Wow, I typed in 55.4 and it's 56. Both my calculators on the desktop and the one here said 56 and I typed in 55. So again, it's easy to make a mistake. Don't feel bad about that. Just try to be careful and watch your numbers. Let's do another one. Okay, so again, here we have, it's asking for the measure of angle F. Angle F is down here. So again, I would recommend you have a piece of paper, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw that triangle, and I'm going to label F. So I'm looking for this angle measure, and what sides do I have? I have the opposite side, the opposite, and I have the adjacent side. So what trig function uses the opposite and the adjacent? Well, not the sine, not the cosine. Oh, the tangent. The tangent of F is going to equal that opposite over the adjacent. So now, since I'm looking for the angle, I'm going to do the inverse. The angle F's measure will be the inverse tangent of 4/5. So again, I grab my calculator and I'm going to hit the second key. I'm going to hit the tangent. So I see that inverse tangent going on. And then I'm going to type in this ratio of 4/5 here, because I'm doing the inverse tangent of 4/5. So I type in 4 divided by 5. I hit enter and I get 38.65, or if I round to 1 decimal place, 38.7. Again, I want to show it on this calculator here in case you have to use a calculator on your computer. I'm going to clear out first. Now remember, on this calculator, I kind of do things backwards. I'm first going to do the ratio. I'm going to do the 4/5 and hit equals. That's me doing this inside the parentheses, 4 divided by 5. And now I'm going to do the inverse tangent, which is this button here with the little -1. Again, you might have to push the second on your thing again. And I get 38.659, which is exactly what I had over here, 38.659. Since I'm rounding to 1 decimal place, let's see if I can get this one right. I'm going to type in 38.7. Let's see if I can type that in right. 38.7 and hit submit. Terrific, we did it, great. So again, that's today's lesson. So try not to make it any harder than it needs to be. Let's do one more. I'm just going to jump up here a little ways. Oh, this one has a decimal, but that's no problem. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try to look to see which angle I'm trying to find. I'm trying to find angle I. That's this angle here. So again, on my paper, I'm going to draw that triangle, just a reference triangle. Here's my angle I. I'm looking for that angle. What sides do I have? Well, I have the opposite side, 3, that's the opposite, and I have across from the right angle, the hypotenuse. So I have the hypotenuse, which is 3.9. So I have the opposite and the hypotenuse. Again, I look at my 3 trig functions. What trig function uses the opposite and the hypotenuse? Well, the sine does. So what I'm going to be doing is, to find angle I, I'm going to be doing the inverse sine of that opposite over hypotenuse, 3/3.9. Grab my calculator, hit my second inverse sine of 3/3.9, hit enter, and I get 50.28 or 50.3. Again, on this calculator here, I'm going to do the ratio first, so I'm going to clear this out. I'm going to do the 3 divided by 3.9 and hit equals. I get that ratio of 3 over 3.9. Now I'm going to hit the inverse sine key, and I get 50.28, just like I did on my other calculator. Now again, if I type it in right, I should type in 50.3, because I'm rounding to the nearest tenth. So I go 50.3, and I hit submit, and I get it correct. So if you have any questions on this, please email me or log on at 1 o'clock during my online office hours, and I will help you understand this concept a little better.